Alright, good morning everybody, good afternoon, good evening whenever you're watching the videos. That's the nice thing about the videos, you can watch them at any time that you want. And you can record them at any time you want. It's about midnight, a little after midnight right here, so... let's see. We are now in beginning algebra, where chapter 7 is rational equations, and 7.6... Sorry, chapter 7 is rational expressions. 7.6 is rational equations. This is our B video, our second video, and we've done introduction to rational equations, and now we're going to solve more rational equations. So we're going to essentially just solve another rational equation. So this is our introduction. Here's our first example, and here's the steps that we need to do. And like I said, probably the most important let's see, summarized version is, again, these are all kind of summarized, but step number 2 is identify the lowest common denominator, multiply both sides of the equation by the LCD, or multiply all terms in the equation by the lowest common denominator, and then solve. So that's essentially what we have to do, and that happens when we've got a rational equation. Rational means fractional, equation means we've got an equal sign. So if we've got a fraction and an equal sign, then we find the lowest common denominator, multiply by the lowest common denominator, and then solve. So here's what we did in 7.4a, and now in 7.4b, we're going to just solve the equation. It says solve the equation. All right, well, let's see. I've got an equal sign, and I've got a fraction, or a rational expression here. So I've got a rational equation. If I've got a rational equation, then what do? Find the lowest common denominator, multiply all terms by the lowest common denominator, and then solve. So step number 1 is find our lowest common denominator. Lowest common denominator sometimes jumps out at you. So if we look at this one, we say, well, lowest common denominator, this is over 1, I suppose. Lowest common denominator includes every single factor from every single denominator raised to the highest power they see it. My essentially one factor is a minus 2. So my lowest common denominator is a minus 2. So what I do then for a rational fractional equation, find the lowest common denominator, multiply every term by the lowest common denominator. So I'm going to take my first term, multiply by my lowest common denominator, that's an a. I'm going to take my second term. That's going to get a little bit crunched in here. There's my second term, and I'm going to multiply by my lowest common denominator of a minus 2. I'm going to take my third term, multiply by my lowest common denominator, and I put all these in parentheses. A minus 2 is in parentheses because we're multiplying the entire factor of a minus 2 times all of these terms in my original equation. So now I'm going to multiply. I found my lowest common denominator. I'm multiplying all my terms by my lowest common denominator. The blue term becomes 1 times a minus 2 is a minus 2. The green term becomes a minus 2 over 1 times 3a over a minus 2. A minus 2 cancels with a minus 2, and I've got just 3a plus 3a equals my black term, my last term, becomes 6 over a minus 2 times a minus 2, or times a minus 2 over 1. A minus 2 divided by a minus 2 cancels out because they are factors. A minus 2 is a factor, a minus 2 is a factor. Factors can cancel out. That becomes 1, and my last term, my third term, becomes just a 6, because when we multiply by the a minus 2, we cancel that one out. So this one, the blue, green, black equation, looks a lot easier to work with than my original equation, because I've multiplied by my lowest common denominator and I've gotten rid of all my denominators. So now step number 3 is solve. A minus 2 plus 3a equals 6. Well, on the left side we just combine like terms, and on the left side I'll go to blue. A plus 3a gives me 4a. Minus 2 stays as minus 2 equals 6. Let's see, now we combine like terms. We combine like terms on the left, and now we have to move the variables to one side, numbers to the other side. Variables will stay on the left side, numbers go to the right side. 4a doesn't change, plus 2 minus 2 goes away, equals 6 plus 2, 8. 4a divided by 4 on each side gives me a equals 8 divided by 4, 2. And now, should be done. But now what have we not done? What have we forgotten to do? We forgot to go through, whoops, here's our steps again. We didn't determine the domain restrictions, and that's going to be important for pretty much all of our rational expressions, especially when we got, it's going to be especially important for rational equations, when we've got especially variables in our denominator. So domain restrictions, remember, happen when we divide by 0, so we can't divide by 0. So in our original equation, we've got a minus 2 in my denominator. So if a minus 2 equals 0, then we would have a problem, right? Because then we would be dividing by 0. So for what values of a does that division by 0 happen? Well, we solve this mini black equation by adding 2 to each side, and we say, well, what happens here? I've got a equals 2. A equals 2 means that I've got a restricted value. So we can't have a equal 2, because if we have a equals 2, it's 2 minus 2 in my denominator, and I'm dividing by 0. So a equals 2 is a restricted value. But the only problem is that when the solution we've come up with is a equals 2. And the problem we run into is that that's a restricted value. So if our solution is a restricted value, we have to throw it away. So that solution can't be put back into our original equation, because then we have division by 0. So therefore, a equals 2 as a solution is the only solution we came up with, but it doesn't work. So essentially this equation has no solution. So it's kind of a long way around to find that, well, we've got no solution. We did do all of our steps, and we did all of our steps correctly, but because a equals 2 is the only solution we came up with, but it's a restricted value, we essentially have no solution. So officially the answer to this one is no solution.